Kamrimo. I bring you greetings from our hills, our rivers, our valleys, and our mountains. My name is Anukra, and I'll be your host this evening. Welcome to the final session of Travel Futures 2.0. We've had a wonderful opportunity for the last 30 days to learn and unlearn with each other. And today, before we begin our session, let us watch a music video by a very popular Arunachali singer and also a very dear friend of Tribal Design Forum, Tucker Nabam.
This man, he left as a boy, about 7 or 8, 2 long decades, till he was home again. They were all ears to listen to the story of a man who left sadly as a boy. He felt the joy, but even more worry, 'cause he just couldn't find the words to tell them the story. He heard his heartbeat. They felt his heart speed. He stuttered, he stammered, he felt but didn't give up. They were all ears to listen to the story of a man who left sadly as a boy. He felt the joy, but even more worry, 'cause he just couldn't find the words to tell them the story. They all fell silent, he felt naked, lost, surrendered. They heard this man wail.
Just as Tucker just couldn't find the words to tell them his story, I feel that this is probably one of those sentiments that most of us sitting here today feel or have felt at one point of our time. One cold early January 2019, while navigating my research journey, I stumbled upon a Tribal Design Forum with my mind still being jumbled up, wondering how could I tell my story. One shy hello led to a scheduled interview, which led to a conversation and eventually opened doors for collaboration. Thus began my journey with TDF. Not as an artist or a designer, but as an academically stifled researcher burdened with the weight of data collection and running against time. As I stepped into this world of design, I told myself, I am no artist. I am no designer. Let me walk through the shallow waters, then take the next exit out. But there were no shallow waters, no exits, only a vast universe waiting to be explored. I began with small baby steps, standing behind the scenes, watching, hoping to learn from others. Instead, I encountered myself. Pushed to the forefront, I discovered that I was the story to be read and told. In embracing that truth, I grew into the strength of my native voice. One person cannot wage a war, but one spark can ignite a fire, and that spark lit something in me. A hunger to know more about my story, my ancestral history, and in that moment, I realized that the story that I had been searching elsewhere was already within me. That quiet spark grew into a flame. I found my voice rooted in ancestry, in memory, and in truth. What I thought was a solitary path unfolded into a shared journey. Along the way, I found friends, kindred souls who searched alongside me. Together, we began to return to our sacred ground to bloom in the soil of belonging. The storm that once unsettled me had calmed. Now the universe I once feared as empty is alive with stars, stories, resilience, hope, love, and the shimmering strength of my tribal identity. Each week, we here at TDF gather not only for discourses, but to grow in friendship, to nurture a community, to build a space we had longed for. With the TDF team freely giving their time and skills, we have been able to shine with courage and with hope. The old myth that design belongs only to designers has faded away. TDF has become a space for many voices, many callings. Here, researchers, dreamers, artists, and storytellers come together not just to design, but to imagine and to shape the future we believe in. Since 2021, we have had over 230 weekly classes, and the documentation of these has become a contemporary archive of tribes in transition, the only one of its kind in India. How cool is that? We have also established a tribal-led tribal university and 8-acre campus in Tejgarh at the Adivasi Academy. One small spark and shared dreams coming together have brought us here today. This very moment, Tribal Future 2.0 is a vision coming into life, dreamt with open eyes and brought to life with hard work by young tribal minds. We don't come here to claim territory, we come here to build a bridge, to build a legacy, to be a part of our ancestral generations, given the privilege to carry on the traditions. The future we envision is one of our voices finding a rightful place in history and sharing the wonderful news that tribes are transitioning. We might have been cocooned for the longest time, but now we are breaking free. TDF hopes to fan into flame this very change by creating a safe space and welcoming space and a platform for every profession and specialization that wishes to discuss, contribute, and help design the future of tribal communities. We aim to harness our own unique ways of working and our limited collaborative resources to build pathways that honor tribal epistemologies, authorship, and dignity while reminding ourselves of what fine designers we are and can be of the tribal futures being woven on the sands of time. Helping us imagine this future today, we have with us Dr. Amy Parent. Dr. Amy Parent's Nisga name is Knox Twit. Dr. Parent is a scholar, speaker, mentor, educator, and mother. She is an associate professor and Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Education and Governance in the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University. She is also co-chair of the Indigenous Research-led Circle with the Tri-Council Agency. and the inaugural Associate Director for the SFU Cadici Center for Educational Justice. In 2023, she received the BC Historical Foundation Certificate of Merit with the Nis Joel Remartiration Delegation Team, which recognized their collaborative work in bringing their family's memorial pole back to its rightful place after being stolen for 94 years. In 2024, she was named the Confederation of University Faculty Associations of British Columbia Distinguished Academic of the Year. Dr. Parent continues to undertake her responsibilities to national and international communities, amplifying Indigenous research, governance, remartiation, and self-determination priorities through over 700 media features, including news articles, television appearances, radio interviews, and magazines. The format for today's session is going to be Dr. Parent's sharing for 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A. Thereafter, we are going to have a couple of TDF announcements and a final Thanksgiving. Dr. Parent, welcome to TDF. The floor is yours. Amy, you're on mute.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate that. And I always recognize the challenges of reading these academic biographies out loud. So thank you so much for that. But I'd like to begin by sharing a few words in my language. So Amahihlu, or to many of you, Amasilksas. It's good morning here on Coast Salish territories. And good evening to all of you. And thank you so much for staying up so late and welcoming me into your circle. As Indigenous peoples, I know that we all have a spiritual memory that guides us to honor others. And so I begin by showing my reverence to our respected Simgigat and our Sigin Mahanak, which in the Niska language means our chiefs and our matriarchs, and all the upcoming generations of these beautiful lands and waterways where I currently reside, which is on the Squamish and the Tsleil-Waututh territories here in what is colonially known as Vancouver, British Columbia. I also begin by expressing my appreciation to our current and our past respected leaders and ancestors that have fought so hard to keep our language and our culture alive for us as Niska peoples. And of course, thank you to Sudhir, Dr. Mintz, and the Tribal Forum for inviting me to share a little bit about my work today. And so I'd like to spend a few minutes by situating my work within the context of my hereditary responsibilities. And it was so nice to hear about the resonance and the important work that the Tribal Forum is doing in terms of strengthening tribal identities and helping people to find their stories and to give voice to our knowledge systems. And so on that note, I'm going to share a little bit more about myself. If I can work my... Oh. So my Niska name is Sigmananak Nox Dowit, which means Mother of the Raven Warrior Chief named Dowit. And I'm a member of the House of Nisdal, and I was a member of the Niska delegation that journeyed to Scotland in 2022 to inform the National Museums of Scotland, as well as the Government of Scotland, that we wanted our totem pole returned to us. And within the Niska social system, we have a term called house. And traditionally, we would have lived in longhouses, and we would have been born into a clan. We had 4 clans, and so my clan would be the Ganada clan, which is a frog clan. And within these clans, we also have house systems. And so within a traditional house, you would have had members of an extended family living together. And so our house is a very important social unit, and it really ultimately guides our protocols and our rights, and is led by a number of hereditary chiefs and matriarchs. And so I come from the House of Nisdal, and that's our house crest that you see here on the slide that was drawn by my brother, Chief Calvin McNeil, who is a chief as well as an amazing and talented artist. And here, another slide, you see a picture of Samagat Nisdal, who's a chief of our house, displaying our crest, which in many ways is almost like a passport in terms of our identity and the story of who we are and our origins as a house, and the names and the titles that we carry that are linked to our lands and to our territories. I moved to Coast Salish territories, specifically Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh territories, many moons ago for my post-secondary, and I've been back and forth from my home in North Vancouver to the Nass, and as well as to Gitxsan territories in Hazelton ever since. And so here are some photos of the lands where I come from. Here you see a photo of a replica totem pole, which I'm going to talk a little bit about the original pole in about a few minutes. But this replica pole was raised in 2019 and now sits outside of our community center in the village of Lac aux Apes, which is the village that I come from in the Nisga'a Nation in northwestern British Columbia. And like many of you, my cultural responsibilities intertwine and shape my academic responsibilities. And so our UNESCO chair is rather new. And so rather than presenting a fully formed plan, since we know that our work is relational and co-emergent, today I really wanted to share the philosophies and the relationships and the projects that have carried me into this role, as well as leaning towards the future of the commitments that I bring to Indigenous knowledge research governance. In terms of a philosophy that is near and dear to my heart, as Niska peoples, we've always organized our lives and our societies around the principle of Sight Gilt Awesome, which means our common bowl. And there's a beautiful quote here from the late Chief Joe Gosnell, who explains the meaning of our common bowl philosophy. But ultimately, for me, I understand the lands and the waterways of where we come from. They are a valley, and so we see them as very much being shaped like a bowl. And it's this common bowl principle that conveys a reciprocal way of living that is based on our collective values and encourages us to contribute to the common good for the betterment of our society. And also important within that, our elders remind us that it also requires us to, the term I used in our title is Sight Halals, which means to work together. It's important for us to work together in order to maintain our unity and to support our common goal for future generations. And so I'm just so grateful to be extending our relationships with so many tribal Indigenous peoples in India and globally through my collaboration with Dr. Mintz and, of course, your forum. I've also translated our Common Bowl framework as a way to represent my scholarship in Indigenous research, my engagement with Indigenous methodologies, recognizing that our Indigenous knowledge systems are transdisciplinary, but also the ways that we might help others in terms of our mentorship, the community service that we do within the university, as well as within our own communities and nations. And so I have engaged this philosophy and framework in my tenure application to Simon Fraser University. I've also included it in my Canada Research Chair proposal, and most recently with Dr. Mintz and our UNESCO Chair application as a way to push against colonial norms of measuring scholarship only through individual output rather than through our collective responsibilities and relational accountability. I also felt it was important to visually express our philosophy and to challenge the written word that is very heavy in academia. And so I decided to include this because I know many of you are designers, and I know you also recognize how challenging it can be to represent knowledge and relationships and philosophies in ways that go beyond text alone. And then to have that recognized and to be able to push against some of the colonial systems and some of the applications and processes that are often pushed onto us. And so this is a form of my resistance and a way of bringing in the philosophies that guide who I am as a scholar into my work. But it's also important to acknowledge my academic lineage and the oral teachings that inform my work. And so here's a sample of the many amazing people in the world of Indigenous education within my own nation, as well as many other nations here in British Columbia that have influenced me and some of the teachings and the work that has inspired me. And in talking with Dr. Mintz, she also talked about just the important work that your forum is doing in terms of supporting solidarity and providing a safe space of belonging and encouragement and support for each other. And so that really brought me back to my graduate school days. And I have a similar parallel. And my experience was really with the Supporting Aboriginal Graduate Enhancement Program, which the acronym is SAGE, and you see that there in the logo in blue. And it was really a Maori scholar, Dr. Graham Smith, who first brought what was called the My model from Aotearoa to Canada when he came here. And it was Dr. Joanne Archibald, the woman who trained me, a Stalo mentor, and somebody who's become a lifelong mentor to me, who ultimately helped to carry it forward. And they developed it into the SAGE program to support our local context. But SAGE became a peer-led support model with Indigenous faculty guidance. It offered monthly circles, whereas Indigenous graduate students, we could share our research, our struggles, solidarity, and encourage each other. And so it helped to create spaces. It continues on today. It creates spaces of belonging and collective strength within institutions that too often isolate us as Indigenous scholars. And for many of my colleagues outside of the area of Indigenous education, it's still quite common for them to be sometimes the only scholars in their fields at times, and we call them the lonely onlys. And so these spaces become really important, and they show us why collectivity is essential for survival and to help us flourish amidst colonial and ongoing forms of systemic oppression. So, somewhere, I think after my second year of my Canada Research Chair program, I began to develop a concept and a word and a living practice to really define some of the work that is happening and some of the work that will continue, particularly as it relates to our UNESCO chair. And so here I just wanted to start off with a definition of Indigenous knowledge research governance because it can be a bit of a $100 academic word. But ultimately, I see it as a framework where Indigenous peoples determine how research is conducted, what knowledge is shared, what language is used, who is involved, and how responsibilities and benefits can be distributed, all in accordance with our own laws, our values, and our governance traditions. And so it's not a model to be adopted so much as a living expression of our own self-determination over our knowledge, our language, our data, and our research governance. It's ultimately also to support the holistic well-being of our communities, to sustain the living world that holds us, and ensure the future generations inherit relationships of balance and accountability and respect. And I thought instead of talking about Indigenous knowledge research governance abstractly, I'd like to share with you a research story and a project that's brought me into my current UNESCO chair work with Dr. Mintz. Stories have a way of bringing abstract definitions to life in ways that allow us to develop our own meaning and our own emotional resonance. And I really appreciated the music video that was shown prior to my presentation. And I could relate to that because I think as Indigenous people, sometimes a story actually just finds us and it brings us into the work that we do. And certainly that has been my experience. And so I'm going to share with you the Nistal rematriation story. So I first learned about my family's original Nistal totem pole well over 5 years ago. And it was at a time when I had gone for a visit to Samagat Nistal, and that's my house chief. I'd gone to his house, and I'd gone to him because I'd already been doing quite a bit of research with our government, in particular in the areas of language revitalization. And I've been spending quite a bit of time in my nation's archives. And for folks who aren't familiar with our context, as Nisga'a peoples, we spent over 100 years negotiating a treaty with Canada in order to have self-governing powers under Canada's constitution. And as a result of that, we have a fairly extensive archive. And so it was in that archive while I was doing research that I come across some very spiritual information that was related to our house. And I was uncertain what I should do with that. And so I found myself going to Samagat Nistal's house and sharing this information with him. And after I was done the story, he said, "Oh, you have a grant for language revitalization. Can you help us raise a totem pole? Because we have a replica pole that's been carved, but we don't have the funding to raise it." And this totem pole had been carved under the former Nistal, because our names get passed on from generation to generation. And so it had been the former Nistal, Horace Stevens, who'd had our replica pole carved, but we didn't have the funding to raise it. But we had a feast coming up, and it was Samogat East Jaw, Earl Stevens, it was his intentions to try and have it raised. And so I recall in that conversation asking him, well, how much funding do we need? I'm an academic. I can probably find you the funding, but it might take me 6 months. And so he told me, and I have to say, up until that day, I had no idea how much it was going to cost to raise a totem pole. But I went out and I began thinking about how can we find this funding. But before I left his house that day, he also said, and by the way, while you're out there looking for funding, can you also look into the museum where our original totem pole is? It's somewhere in Scotland, and prior to the ratification of the Nisco Final Agreement in 2000, we had a delegation go through Europe, and at one point they went to the museum where that totem pole was, and the museum officials told them that it was too old to be moved. And he goes, but I'm really interested in finding out a little bit more information on one of the names on the pole because I want to give out that name at our next feast, and I just need a little bit more information about it. So I went away and I did some research. And in my research, I found out that it was at the National Museums of Scotland. And also, since 2000, it had been moved. And so that made me very angry. And so that made me return to Samogan East Jaw and said, let's work on a tri-agency grant together. We'll partner with the Laukazop Village government. And I said, I think we should go to Scotland and we should tell them we want this pole back. If they can move it, I'm pretty sure we can move it. And so this grant became the foundation of the research project that I co-led, and it worked in tandem with our rematriation claim to the National Museums of Scotland. And I do have one secret that I'd like to share with you all, if you promise not to tell anybody. No one ever gave me a PhD in totem pole rematriation. And I recall that day that my uncle asked me to go and to look into this original pole and to look for funding for this pole. I remember thinking in the back of my head, should I tell him that I'm not an expert in museum studies and that my PhD is in education? I decided not to, and I'm so grateful that I didn't because it was his request and his guidance that has brought us on a journey of a lifetime, and that continues in terms of the relationships I continue to form today with all of you. Um, I'd also like to acknowledge all the members of our delegation that traveled to Scotland with us in August of 2022. I can say that we went with much uncertainty, but with even more determination. And I truly believe that we went with one of the greatest strengths that we have as Nisga'a peoples. We went with our hearts and our minds working together as one in unity. And I'm also grateful to the spirit of my ancestral grandmother, and her name was Joanna Moody. And I really believe that she helped bring together the right team of people to get this totem pole back. And one of the things I've learned is that it's so important to have the right team in order to do work like this. And so here they are. This is a meeting that we had with the cabinet minister in Scotland. So during our time in Edinburgh, we expressed to the museum and then its board and then to Mr. Angus Robertson, who you saw in that picture. He's the cabinet secretary for the Constitution of External Affairs and Culture for the government of Scotland, that our reason for coming to Scotland was that we wanted our children to wake up every day and not have to work so hard to learn the stories of who we are. And so that they could experience our family history and our precious family member with every breath that they take, every breath that they take. We asserted that the Nisga'a Final Agreement, we have a specific chapter in our treaty, Chapter 17, that protects the return of our cultural treasures. And so it gave us legal grounding for our rematriation, but we also led the process based on our own laws. And for us, this just wasn't about museums, it was about our rights, our family, our responsibilities, our laws, and our future. And so we voiced in our assertions to the government of Scotland that as a self-determining nation, that we didn't need Canada or British Columbia with us on that trip. However, we were appreciative of their support following our first trip to Scotland, especially for those airplanes. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But if you would like to learn more about the Nisga'a Final Agreement and its influence on our rematriation process, I have co-written an article featured in the Canadian Museum Association's Muse magazine with the Canada Commission for UNESCO. And here is just our first repatriation that happened in 2010, where we had over 300 cultural treasures returned from the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, as well as the Canadian Museum of History in Ottawa. And it was quite a significant event. And so here you see many of our respected chiefs welcoming home some of our belongings and cultural treasures. And here is our Niska Museum that was also built as a result of the Niska Final Agreement. And this is a museum where our totem pole stands. So if you ever want to go visit it, this is a building, and the building is located in the village of Luckilsap in the Niska Nation. But in terms of the research design, I'd also like to give reverence to the woman who trained me in Indigenous research methodologies and pedagogies, and her name is Kwam Kwam Kwam, Dr. Joanne Archibald. And I feel it's always important to talk about her work. Her work is Indigenous story work methodology, which emphasizes the importance of Indigenous stories as knowledge and theory that can inform both our research and our pedagogical practices. And within our field, in the field of Indigenous education, it's preferable for us to use the term story instead of legend or myth. And within Canada, we had a significant landmark decision in 1997, and it was called the Delgamuth decision, which was rendered from the Supreme Court of Canada. And with that decision, Chief Justice Lamar recognized in law that oral histories both embody historical knowledge and they express cultural values. And so it's a legal recognition of our stories in Canadian law that becomes important because it helps to convey the power and the truths that are embedded in our stories. And that helped us in our work in Scotland. But there's a quote that really resonates with me, and it comes from African novelist Ben Okri. And he says that people are as healthy and as confident as the stories that they tell themselves. Sick storytellers can make their nations sick, and sick nations can make for sick storytellers. And so I imagine that many of you are present today. I'm sure you all are all very interested in and continuing to disrupt the stories that have founded our disciplines, our societies, and the imperial and colonial empires that continue to benefit from these stories, and all the acquisitions that come from these stories. And so the origin story of this research project and the pole's theft, according to our oral memory, is shared in further detail in a book chapter that you see here on the slide, and it comes out of Dr. Emma Bond and Michael Morris's book on Scotland's transnational heritage. And we also used this book chapter. So I should say, just in terms of the context of this book chapter, I co-wrote this book chapter with one of our respected wolf chiefs, and that is Samagat Duke, Chief William Moore. And we actually used this book chapter as part of our submission claim to the National Museums of Scotland as our family in order to support our claim for the permanent transfer of our totem pole, which we then reiterated in our oral testimony upon our first in-person visit to the museum. But I have to say that I felt it was important as a first step in our rematriation process to begin building a solidarity with critical scholars in the area of museum studies that could support our claim. I also recognized that all of the information that I found on the pole had been written by the person who'd stolen it. And so it was written from a colonial perspective, and that colonial archive would take precedent unless we challenged it. And so I felt it was important to get a publication out before we went to challenge them in person. And I think it was also important to recognize the oral memory and the oral memory that had been retained by Chief William Moore and his generosity in sharing that story with me so that we could have the story written down. And I also see this is important for us in terms of bringing forward the power of Indigenous stories in an effort to heal from the sick stories that have shaped our present reality. And so I don't have an actual slide that shows my methodologies, but I'll just speak to them generally here along with my rematriation slide. In terms of our scholarly design, we worked with a Niska methodology, which we call our Site Gilmcott, which means one heart, one mind, one nation, under the guidance of our hereditary system. And at its core, I see it as a way to support living and a living unifying practice. After we got the grant and before I went into the formal research, I felt it was important to meet with our Nisga'a Council of Elders that guides our nation, as well as to meet at that time within our governance structure, within the Niskalisms government, which is sort of like our federal government within our nation. Um, we had a department called our Niska Ayuk, which is our law and our protocol office. And so I work closely with our law and protocol office. And then recently, it's now transformed itself into our Niska Language and Cultural Authority. And then at the village level, the village where we come from, I also worked with the Lakalzat village government and our hereditary leadership of my house in order to support the work. Because I'm a representative from the university, I also felt it was important to create a memorandum of research agreement that outlined our partnership responsibilities, our communication. I wanted to protect our Niska collective intellectual property rights, as well as to identify who is responsible for grant administration and then the collective work that we would do around the knowledge mobilization. And so that took 9 months for us to do before I started the research, and I felt it was important, and I'm grateful for that. And of course, I also had to continue my ongoing and consistent relationships, both professionally in Vancouver as well as traveling to the NAS for my cultural responsibilities. In terms of specific research methods, I began by critically re-examining and challenging the colonial archive with our hereditary leadership. I had many conversations with our Niska matriarchs, chiefs, carvers, and museum professionals. And like I said, all this information was brought back to our house. We had house meetings. I attended community events and feasts. And throughout the process of our remutation, I spent just about every night having a check-in phone call with Samog East Jal, providing an update on what was happening. In terms of other research methods, I think it's important for us to live our matriarchal responsibilities. And so for me, that includes protecting, promoting, preserving, and passing on Niska knowledge alongside political praxis to mobilize our rematriation priorities. I gathered and I continued to keep story work informed research notes to support the development of what right now is a book on Niska self-determining research methodologies and a film that we have in post-production. And at the culmination of our totem pole coming home, we also hosted as a family and a house, we hosted a feast, which included over 600 witnesses. We ensured that we did oral testimony to validate findings, which we call relational validity. And of course, we had an opportunity to celebrate an important historical moment with our oral memory and our traditions. But in terms of our actual story, our rematriation story itself, it begins in the 1860s and 1870s when our ancestral grandmother, Joanna Moody, had our totem pole carved and commissioned. And so, through some of my research that I did, particularly with the knowledge that was shared with me by Lydia Stevens, I learned that Joanna Moody lived to be 115 years old. And so I was able to trace how old she would have been when she carved this totem pole. And so that meant that she would have been about 25 to 35 years old at most. And that tells you the kind of person that she was. If she lived to be 115 years old, we know that she was a very strong woman. The pole was carved to honor Zawit, who at that time, he was a fallen warrior. He died defending our nation's sovereignty. And when you look at our totem pole, his name is represented by the crest. And actually, that's the name that I also carry along with my brother, Calvin McNeil, who is Zawit in this lifetime, and I'm Knox Zawit. We know who carved the totem pole. He was a very famous, prolific carver of his time. His name was Oye. And I began to learn more about Joanna. I recognized that Joanna undertook leadership in a time of duress. And her leadership would have came about at one of the worst acts of genocide that we ever experienced as Niska peoples. Her leadership came during a time of deep grief as she experienced the loss of a family member, and she was called upon to erect a memorial pole to honor Zawit. And as a family, we're deeply grateful, and we recognize that she did the right thing for our house, and we have felt her spirit guiding our rematriation process strongly over the last several years. And when I first began this project, I initially started using the term repatriation, and it was unconscious. And as I began to reflect that we are a matrilineal society as Nisga'a peoples, the term really didn't apply to us. And as my knowledge of museum practices deepened, I recognized that repatriation processes are often steeped in patriarchal and paternalistic and Eurocentric practices, laws, and logics. And so we were very clear in our claim to the National Museums of Scotland that the return of the New Style pole must center Nisga'a laws, ways of knowing and being. And as many of us know, our matriarchs hold leadership roles that are to be balanced with our respected chiefs and our beloved family members in our houses, our clans, and nation in order to support our governance needs. And I also recognize that rematriation is an ongoing process for us due to the colonial harms caused by settler colonialism. And it's going to take the odd leg wrestling match to get us there. But also an important distinction when talking to other Indigenous peoples outside of our context is to recognize our diversity and to know that for us, rematriation will only work for those of us that are matrilineal, and that as Indigenous peoples, we don't all have the same social structure. And so there are other terms, and of course, other terms within our language that also are very relevant. But our preferred term for this process that we undertook was rematriation. And of course, we did have names in our language in terms of what it meant to bring an ancestor home. When we first began, when we first went to Scotland in 2022, we shared that Marius Barbeau, the colonial ethnographer that you see here on the slide, stole our totem pole, and he did so without our permission. We did our research, and we shared evidence that the Government of Canada, through orders given by Duncan Campbell Scott, had given Canada's permission to remove the pole from our village and sell it to the museum. And we let the people of Scotland know that we wanted the spirit of this pole to be free on our motherlands where it belonged. And so in terms of some of the meeting negotiations, this is the first time that we walked into the National Museum right before we were brought into the room to see the totem pole for the first time. And here you see Samogan Eastall and my cousin Shauna McKay. And we were the first living ancestors to see the pole since it was stolen from us. So once we went through our ceremonial protocols, and I will say it was important for us to keep the museum in the room with us the first time we walked in. We felt it would be very important for them to feel what we were feeling, and we felt like that would be part of their pedagogical training in terms of understanding its significance to us. And so they agreed. It was very emotional the first time seeing the pole, but also feeling the pole and recognizing its spirit and that it had been waiting for us to come. Once we went through our cultural protocols and spoke to the pole in our language and followed the protocols that we were instructed to do from our matriarchs and members of our community, we were brought into a formal negotiation process. And once we began our formal negotiations, it didn't take long for us to become really apparent that we had a clash of worldviews and misunderstandings about our intentions to bring the totem pole home. There was mutual recognition on the need to create a space that can acknowledge both of our legal systems, our laws, and our cultures through our own worldviews. But in that first meeting, I can say that we didn't quite know how to get there. And so in our oral testimony to the National Museums of Scotland, we indicated that we expected the return of the memorial pole without condition to the House of Neustall and the Nisga'a government. And that we expected that our ayuk, our law and protocols, to be centered and respected rather than following a procedure that was dictated by Scottish legislation. We had done our homework. We had reviewed the National Museum of Scotland's repatriation policy with leading Canadian repatriation experts in Canada. And we expressed that it was not relevant for our discussion. And we explained that it was not just talking about semantics, that we saw that there was a fundamental different ontological and epistemological differences in understanding the living and the spiritual nature of our pole that was expressed by our hereditary leadership that was with us so eloquently that day. Sacred belongings, as we know, are not museum objects that can be owned, and museum procedures really only relate to belongings as property. And so we provided evidence that the pole was more than an object, it was more than property or anything that could actually be controlled by a museum. And after our first visit, and this is something I always have to share publicly, we agreed to wait 3 months after 3 rounds of negotiations during the week that we were there. And I have to say that given my, at that time, my lack of expertise of engaging with museums, and I was quite impatient going there. And so I actually believe that we would have an answer and a decision within 3 days. I'm not known to have a lot of patience with colonial institutions. And so it was actually our own delegation that asked me to perhaps give the National Museum of Scotland a little bit more time because we would also need that time. They raised an important point that was, which was like, what happens if we actually get this totem pole home? Who's going to pay for it? Right now, the majority of our government is on vacation. It's August. And then we're going to have to go talk to British Columbia. We're going to have to talk to Canada. And we know how long these bureaucratic processes can take. So maybe we should actually, agree to this 3 months that they're suggesting in order to give us that time. And so that's something I have to share that I really had a belief that I could do this in 3 days. Um, but I can say it was really, I felt a lot of anxiety leaving the National Museums of Scotland after our first visit. We know that the truth of our history can be told in many different ways. And on the last day that we were in the National Museums of Scotland, we went to go say goodbye to the pole. And I had no sense of whether or not we would actually be able to bring the totem pole home with us. And so during that time, we always travel as a delegation, but we also bring somebody with us who carries a really important role. We call them our Geldam Aliach, which is our orator, and they speak on behalf of our family. And so our Geldam Aliach had his drum, and he began calling witnesses. And there was hundreds of people in the gallery surrounding our totem pole and on the balconies. And we call them as witnesses, and we let them know that they're witnessing our family's stolen property and that we needed their help to have it returned to us. And so we were incredibly uplifted by the children of Scotland who heard our calls for witnesses. And they listened to the story of our pole's theft and our family's desire to have it returned to us. And one of the things that I really recognize working in education is that we know that children have an innate sense of justice and they know the difference between right and wrong. And so it was the children of Scotland who came to us and they asked if they could learn our language. Some of them were a little bit shy. They sent their parents to us first, but they were actually quite fascinated by our songs and they asked if they could learn our songs. And then they also told us that they hoped that we got our totem pole back because it's wrong to steal. And so I can say that there are many moments when we didn't know the outcome of what our efforts were going to be. And as we got on the plane to leave Scotland to come back to Canada, it became really important to ask, what is our next right decision? What is our next right decision? Because the next right decision gave us the power to take the next transforming step, one at a time. And I can say it's okay to be scared in situations where we might only know one step ahead. But it's also really important that our choices reflect our hopes and not our fears. May our choices really reflect our hopes and not our fears, because it's our hope that brings us one step closer to joy. And so on December 1st of 2022, we learned that the pole was going to be returned to us at that 3-month date. And so almost exactly 1 year to the date of our first arrival at the National Museums of Scotland, we returned again. And this time it was to undertake the spiritual preparations that were needed in order to have the pole taken down and have it returned to the Nass Valley. This time we came back with an extended delegation. And here's just some of the photos. And so we arrived the last day before the totem pole was taken down. And here's some of our respected chiefs. And the chief here with, if you can see the wolf headdress, that is Samagat Duke. And he was the chief that had the oral memory of the pole's theft. And then we also traveled with Samagat La, an Eagle chief. And one of the things that we did in our ceremony was that we requested that also the children of Scotland be present as witnesses. And so the museum honored our request and they invited a school of Gaelic children to witness the process and of our countries and our nations making and repairing and renewing relationships with each other. And so that was really beautiful. And they also sang some songs to the pole in the Gaelic language, which were to represent sort of saying goodbye in their language and had a lot of meaning. It was very beautiful. But I can also share a brief story within the story that happened right before we went on this trip. And I was undergoing a lot of preparations. We decided that we were going to do some filming prior to our leaving. And so I was juggling many different things all at once. And so I found myself a little tired one afternoon. I was in the Nass Valley and I decided I need to have a quick nap. And during that time, I had a dream. And in that dream, I saw rows of totem poles out front of our government buildings in the Nass. And they were absolutely beautiful and powerful looking poles, but they were out of balance. You could see the black form line, like traced very heavily in paint on these poles, but it was really hard to see the red form line because it was faded and it was a really kind of a light blush color. You could see it, but you had to look hard. And so I woke from this dream and I ran over to my brother, Samoget Zawit, Calvin McNeil. I ran over to his house and he was in his carving studio that day. And as I talked to him, I was telling him about this dream, and I also requested a print because once we got home, we had to undertake our feast preparations, and we wanted to be able to have a significant gift that could honor our guests as witnesses. And so I had asked him to design a print to represent that, and so he did. And you see that print here on the slide of the raven sitting on top of the hat. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit more about how he interpreted that vision. But I do recall telling him at that time that we needed to bring the red in and that the red must become more visible. Otherwise, the poles and our way of life will be imbalanced, and the red needed to be in balance with the black. And so for us, you see that red and black are very prominent in our designs, and black represents darkness. It also represents male energy. And red represents life and women, and we see women as life givers. And so red represents that color, but they also must be in balance with each other. And so, yeah, that's a picture of the crest, and I'll talk a little bit more about what he interpreted the story to be later on. But in terms of returning back into the rematriation, I can say that the rematriation itself, although it was written as somewhat of an easy process in the press, I can say it wasn't necessarily an easy process. It did take us 1 year of negotiations from start to finish, but it also took with the music. The pole itself sat in the museum for 94 years, right? So it wasn't a quick process. It took 95 years, and I can say that there were many sacrifices and ongoing negotiations, as well as technical challenges that we had to sort out in a 1 year time frame, which is quite significant when you look at 4 levels of government and 2 museums and just some of the logistical challenges of trying to get, first of all, get a totem pole, get an airplane. Second, to figure out how to transport a 164-year-old totem pole safely from one museum to the other, and then to have that raised. But we were really grateful for all the people that came together and helped us do the right thing. And so yeah, here's a huge list of just some of the people that stepped in and did a lot for our family and our house and our nation. And I'm not going to have time to thank them all here, but if you do visit my website, amyparent.ca, you can read this list a little bit in more detail. But I do express my gratitude for all of the people that collectively helped us to do the right thing. And in terms of our findings, something I like to rephrase as living our responsibilities. I think some of the important highlights for us was that we set an international precedent in the United Kingdom for the return of the first totem pole in a 13-month timeline, but really you got to add on those 94 years. Another dimension of the project from the grant that we initially received from the Tri-Agency was that we were also able to carve a new totem pole, and that totem pole was carved for the House of Lat. By the time we had actually gotten this research grant, we had already had our family's feast, and the replica pole that Samoget East Joel had asked me to find funding for had actually been raised. And so one of the things that he had not been aware of at the time when he made that request was that the community came together. He had been in a period of grieving because he lost his life partner at that time. And so for us, we out of respect, we give people time to just sit with their grief. And so he had been removed from some of his cultural responsibilities for a couple of years, and what he hadn't known was that people had come together in that time frame, and they had used our common bowl, and they contributed to the common bowl to help us have the funds that were needed to raise our totem pole on time for the feast. And so by the time I got this funding, I remember going back to him and saying, okay, so I know we've already raised our replica pole, but did you want to raise a different pole? Do we have another story to tell? And he looked at me and he said, no, he goes, I think that's good. He goes, we were the first house to raise a totem pole in our village since the other ones got stolen. And so it's our turn to help the next house. And so that's how the House of La, we supported that in partnership with the Village of Lac aux Apes. And so if you go to my website as well, you can see some of those photos there. I don't talk in depth about this totem pole because of our cultural protocols, and it's not our right. It's not my house to talk about that. And so, but I can show a little bit of the process of what was involved in some of the carving processes with that. Some other highlights for us was through our partnership with the Niskalisms government and their negotiation team. We were able to receive strong support from Canada, and that also included my Christmas present from Prime Minister Trudeau. I jokingly asked for an airplane for my Christmas present, and in fact, it ended up being two airplanes that were needed to get the totem pole home, as well as two semi trucks from Edinburgh to London. And then once it arrived by plane, the totem pole had to be transported by semi truck from Terrace to the Nass Valley. The Scottish government also contributed well over £300,000 to deinstall the pole and to assist with the first stages of its transport from London. Um, we recognized there were many, we had a lot of support from the media. And on the day the totem pole came home, the story became the leading news story in Canada. And for many Canadians, it became a proud moment of reconciliation. And I began to receive emails and communication from people all over Canada as a result of this work. And I think one of my favorite stories that came through was from a settler who wrote me and said, I work in emergency services, I work in 911. And every day when I come home, I watch the news. And every day I'm dealing with trauma, I'm dealing with people's hardships. And then I come home and I watch the news and there's more negativity on television. And he said, today on September 29th, I turned on the news and I saw your totem pole come home. And it's been a long time since I felt proud to be a Canadian, especially in terms of our relationship with Indigenous peoples. But thank you. So that was probably one of my more touching stories that really resonated with me in terms of that intent. We also had a commitment from the cabinet minister. The day that we went and we visited with him, we brought him the Niska flag, and we also let him know our protocol. One of our negotiators told him that it's protocol that wherever a totem pole stands, that it becomes a territory of the chief of the house that has that totem pole. And so he was informed that because our family's totem pole was in Edinburgh, that it is now our traditional territory as Niska peoples. And so he took this in good stride, and he leaned into the conversation. He said, "You now have my full attention." And so on the day that the totem pole came home, he raised the Niska flag at the Scottish legislature, and I think I have pictures of that. Um, the news story, actually, one of the other things that I noticed throughout the process was that the journalists that spent the most time with us and did the most preparation and were most committed to the work, and also didn't just treat this like a news story, they treated us like we were a relationship. The ones that also came out and supported events that we did follow-up phone calls, asked me questions about what can we do to support anything that you need on that day. Was those journalists that went on to win 4 national journalism awards here in Canada, and I can understand why, because they really did treat this as something that was more than just a work assignment. And through that, actually, there's a really interesting article as well on one of the mistakes that was made, and this was by one of the journalists that really took a lot of strides to be relational with us and respectful. And because a mistake had been made, I said, I think the best protocol for you is to share that with other journalists and tell them what you've learned, and so that they don't do the same thing. And so he honored that. And then because of that, he ended up getting an award as well. So just some interesting things that came from our work. This is the day the totem pole arrived, and I can say that prior to my to this work, I never would have had anything too positive to say about the Canadian Armed Forces. But that day, the individuals that came were incredibly proud to help us do the right thing, and really did do quite a bit to do something that was quite unusual. And in following that, these same individuals, after they dropped it off, drove, I think, 16 hours in their own personal vehicles to show up to our feast to watch the totem pole be uncrated. And here's a picture of Samogat East Jaw with Calvin, my brother who drew the crest, and he's also next in line to become our chief. This is the ceremony. And this is the moment that the pole was uncrated. And so uh, the moment that we began to uncrate the pole, the sun came out. And for anybody that has read the story of the pole's theft, we talk about the colonial storm that came up the river that day. And so we had this beautiful balance, and I would say repositioning of the sun coming out that day. And it was certainly a historical and a beautiful moment that we will remember forever. And for me, the most important dimension of the story is really the passing on of this story to our children. And, you know, we know now that we are going to have multiple generations in our family and within our nation to be able to tell the story of this pole, its origins, its theft, and its journey back across the pond in order to return to our motherlands. And I can say that we have peace in our hearts now. And here's some of my aunties seeing the pole for the first time, some of our matriarchs. And some of our chiefs that came with us. And there's our Niska flag at the Scottish government. And because we did have representatives in Scotland, they also gifted us in our feast hall, and Samogat East Jaw got a kilt, and he's actually getting remarried in the spring. And so we're all encouraging him to wear his new regalia to his wedding. And here's the day that we raised the pole inside the Niska Museum, and many of the allies in the National Museums of Scotland were also there present with us to help us. Oh, and that's another visit to the Lieutenant Governor's house afterwards. And I guess one of the other successes of our process was that Samogat East Jaw got out of Scotland without a criminal record. He had lost all his luggage, or I guess the airlines had lost all of his luggage. And so on the last day there, he was trying to retrieve it, but he almost missed his plane. And the only way for him to get on his plane was to be arrested so he could jump customs. And so the people knew who he was, and so they gladly helped out and they arrested him in order to get him to his plane on time. But when I think about just in closing, I think I've been talking for a while here, but when I reflect on what I've learned from this journey so far, it's not about creating a new story so much as about recognizing the power of the stories that we are part of and the next story that we want to become. Everything that happens to us, it does happen to us for a reason. And it's important to recognize that we can change our language, but for the term rematriation to really have meaning, we must also continue to take action in order for it to be true. And I think ultimately, this story reminds us that Indigenous knowledge research governance must be rooted in relationships, reciprocity, and responsibilities for future generations. We have many more projects that continue to be developed as a result of the work, and I was really conscious not to do academic publications until the actual cultural work and the responsibilities were completed first. And so the film is in post-production. We're doing a feature-length documentary. We also have a non-monetary partnership with the National Museums of Scotland, and we're going to have a 6-minute short that will be in the museum to explain to visitors where the totem pole went and the history of that totem pole and why Scotland returned it to us. And then hopefully next year, if time permits, then the book will come out on Niska research methodologies. And currently I'm just finishing another book, which is also a result of this project, and that's on unsettling Scottish studies and some of the partnerships and the allies that I made in the field of Scottish studies that helped me initially with understanding the Scottish context as well as the museum community itself. And so I believe this book, Unsettling Scottish Studies, with four other Scottish editors, will come out prior to our NISCA book. And then following that, my intention is to work on curriculum to support our students, as well as a university curriculum on the rematration itself. And then I just wanted just to briefly just talk about really just the upcoming work of our chair. Certainly, I think folks are familiar with our chair's focus on Indigenous knowledge research governance. For myself, and I know Dr. Mintz, we have a strong commitment to rematration, language revitalization, continuing to build reciprocal mentorship and partnerships with as many Indigenous rights holders around the world as possible. I'm really grateful to Dr. Mintz's expertise in computer science that'll support us in terms of understanding the needs of data sovereignty as we begin to move further into our understandings of Indigenous knowledge research governance as we work within the UNESCO system and within our various contexts, as well as some of the exciting research that she's going to be undertaking. I know she's probably already explained that in her presentation, so I'll leave it there. But overall, our next steps will have a UNESCO co-chair launch at an event that I'll be organizing. That's part of my Canada Research Chair program. And really grateful that Dr. Lorna Williams, who has been so pivotal in supporting so many trailblazing pathways for us as Indigenous scholars and leaders, will be there to speak. She's also been so pivotal, as some of you may know, in terms of supporting the International Decade for Indigenous Languages, and I'm just so grateful to call her a mentor. And of course, Dr. Mintz, and then we'll have a representative from the Canada Commission for UNESCO, Barbara Filion, who I consider an Innu sister, who has really done a lot in terms of internal advocacy to support our chair. And then closing, we'll have Dr. Barb Wilson, who is a Haida matriarch, who's also been highly supportive of our work and has done some incredible and important things here in British Columbia to support ecological understandings and land stewardship and water protection here. And of course, I don't know if Sonataria has mentioned this, but our intention is to also go on a bit of a journey together and to meet for the first time in person at the World Indigenous Peoples Education Conference, which is going to be in Otoroa in November. And where our intention is to co-present there and to build more relationships with Indigenous peoples from around the world. And so if you're not familiar with the World Indigenous Peoples Education Conference, I do encourage you to take a look at that. It's a really beautiful space. Although it's framed as education, the intention is really to support and uplift the maintenance and the ongoing efforts to revitalize our knowledges and our language systems. And so it's just a beautiful gathering. And so I very much look forward to meeting Dr. Mintz in person and any of you that might be traveling with her. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy, for that beautiful sharing. I'm a very firm believer that it is so essential and important for us to share our experiences because we empower each other when we tell our stories. And I'm sure all of us here today feel very encouraged to hear the journey that you've taken. And for so many of us, I'm sure we also have similar stories. We also have a lot of our things taken away from us, a lot of our narratives rewritten and retold, and our stories being molded to fit the narrative of the majority. So, hearing you moving across the ocean into a new territory and a new land and showing that self-determination of ownership of what is ours and what is yours. It is so beautiful. I'm sure it has encouraged all of us. So thank you for sharing that beautiful story and encouraging all of us. Now we'll have a time of Q&A. So please feel free to write your questions in the chat and we will take it up while everybody is writing their question or formulating their questions. Let me begin with one question. Uh, all of us here, most of us, we've grown outside our native land and our native villages in the hope of getting better education and also finding a space in the larger world. So for the last maybe 18, 20 years, we've been learning so much from the West and internalizing all the other information. So how do we decolonize our mind? How do we decolonize our thinking into finding value of what is our ancestral knowledge system or our ancestral practice, our artifacts?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think that's an ongoing journey for all of us, right? As we sort of grapple with these immense systems that have a lot of power over us and ones that we need to interact with and in terms of our survival. And I, try to not like kind of move into these binaries, but also just recognize like, the daily items that we can do, that we have capacity to do. And I think ultimately, I see learning our own language is really important for those of us who've had our language absolutely taken away from us. So for myself, I've only begun learning my language once I finished my PhD. For those of us in Canada, our grandparents' generation, and sometimes even our parents' generation, depending on our age, our grandparents would have went to residential school where we were like forced not to be able to speak our language and went through significant abuse if we did. So that's something that was attempted to be taken away from us and something that we're reclaiming. And so I always encourage people to return to the language, write in your language, express yourself in the language if you can. I decided once I was done my PhD, I was really excited when they first began teaching the Nisga'a language. It's not something you can just go and take in school, right? And especially if you live outside your own territory in an urban center. And so it wasn't until 2014 that the Nisga'a language was actually brought to the city. And by commitment of a Nisga'a matriarch at that time, with support of our local, like urban organization that supports Nisga'a peoples. And she would get on a plane every week and travel. And so the distance from the Nass Valley to Vancouver, if you were to drive by car, it would be about 17 hours, 18 hours nonstop. On a plane is about an hour and a half, but it's also an hour and a half drive to the airport. So it's like, it takes up a good portion of your day to get to Vancouver. And so she and her husband, she was in her late 70s, she would get on a plane every week to come and teach us our language. Along with that, I have a clan brother here, and his name is Cian Tate, and he was being mentored in language, and so he was at a proficient level, and so they began teaching together. The incredible thing about this elder was that she would also travel to not only to Vancouver, but also to the city of Prince Rupert. So you would have to go back up north and then drive another hour and a half to that city, and she'd teach there, and then she'd go home, right? So she did this for I think for a year, and then after that, it was Cian, who's closer to my age, that took over, and he continued to teach the language until he moved back home. And I think one of the other things that I just really want to honor is that during that time period, nobody paid him, right? And there was no, we did things that we could. Like everybody brought food. I wrote grants, just basic grants, but even the granting environment for language revitalization is very limited, right? And so a lot of this work has to be carried personally by people, and so it just, I guess, it accentuates the struggles for language, but also the need to continue reclaiming and honoring those who carry that forward. But I also say that, anything that you can do that returns you back to your ancestral way of being, maybe it's praying, maybe it's a cold water bath. For us, we do spirit baths. But any kind of practices that can help you be balanced in accordance with your protocols and your ways of being will strengthen you and your spirit in order to continue what you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And I feel like for most of us, learning our language is the first step that we will be taking. So thank you for reminding us one more time that we can take baby steps, but it's necessary to take the first step. So thank you for reminding us about that. We don't have question as such, but we do have a lot of comments. I'll read them out for you. So Anupam says, "Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing a story that is so powerful and inspirational. Recognizing the power of our stories is so important for our Indigenous youth and children all over the world. Another quote that I am taking away today as a proud Indigenous person is, may our decisions reflect our hopes and not our fears." Then Sonal Kumar goes on to say, "Thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story, developing systems that empower and decolonize. Would love to see it come true. The quote, may our decision reflect hope, not fear. I feel it will remain with me lifelong. Thanks." Then Dwarika says, "Thank you so much for your inspiring story. I'm really encouraged after hearing your story. We are also losing our sacred cultural lands in Nepal in the name of so-called development. We are fighting for our sacred land. Listening to your story, I feel like one day we might be able to reclaim our sacred cultural lands."
Wonderful.
Anupam has a question. How do you explain the spiritual and cultural significance of such artifacts as the totem pole to non-Indigenous people who might not understand?
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of my first sort of learning curves with the media. That was always a question that was asked, and so thank you so much for your kind comments, everyone. And I'm inspired by you and by the work that you're doing, and for the struggles that you engage in and the responsibilities that you carry. So yeah, thank you for those. It's uplifting to hear that. But in terms of answering your question about how do you explain the cultural significance, you try your best. You plant little seeds, and so I explain to people that it's different than an object. It's not just a piece of art because a lot of people see our totem poles as art. But it's in fact something that we believe has a living spirit, and we have protocols when we raise a totem pole that the carver comes and he breathes life into the pole. And once the totem pole is raised, if it's successfully raised, it means the spirit comes into that pole. And from that day forward, it has a spirit that we have to respect and honor. It's something that if you are a spiritual person, you can feel. And so that's how I would describe it, as a living ancestor. There's another story. This came to me once we heard news of the totem pole coming home. Um, it took me about a week to actually emotionally feel the impact of the news, because when you're in a state of anxiety and concern and work very hard for something, you don't just kind of switch gears right away. The day we learned the totem pole was going to come home, I had to prepare for the reality of maybe having to spend another 6 months in a room by myself, working with our lawyer, Jim Aldrich at that time, to translate all the work that we've done so far into legal documents, right, in order to move forward with a lawsuit. Or, I remember thinking, or am I going to wake up today and am I going to be able to have a celebration and call my family and tell them the good news? Thankfully, it was the latter. But certainly for me, the emotions didn't hit until about a week later, and it came with a story. And so this story related to a Coast Salish elder from, I believe she was from Catesy. And she'd shared this with somebody in our community who called me. And she said that as a child, for whatever reason, her and her siblings and family had lived in Edinburgh. And this was many years ago. So you can imagine the discrimination that she would have faced living there at that time. And she said that she found her totem pole in the museum as a child, and she would go there because it gave her, it helped her to stay grounded. And I remember the day I heard that story, that's when I cried. I think I cried for about 30 minutes straight, and I just relieved all the sort of anxiety that I've been feeling. And that really, for me, accentuated the fact that our totem pole acted like a grandparent and an elder, right? And that during that time of captivity, that it too formed relationships and it helped others. And through that help, it also strengthened itself to stay there, right? And so that's another way that I try to explain the living nature of that pole. And I regard it as a grandparent.
Oh, that is so beautiful. I hope, Anupam, that answers your question. He has another question along with that, which says, what changes have you seen in the attitude towards Indigenous rights and repatriation, if any, over the years?
Okay, so I'm not that old yet, but but I would say that I'm going to change your question just a little bit because I would say that rematriation itself, although it's a living practice that we have practiced for thousands of years as Nisga'a peoples, the term rematriation is actually quite new in scholarship. It's something that we've been really pushing in terms of policy, and just other forms of recognition. I would say that this is not widely even adopted by all of the museum community yet. Although when I go into these rooms, I do say repatriation isn't enough. We got to include this. But rematriation is more than obviously the return of our ancestors. It's about sort of reviving a way of life that upholds our values as a society that honors women and the role of women within our societies. And also, like I said, bringing that balance in with everybody and respecting everybody, which is an ongoing process with colonialism. So I would say that that part is fairly like new in some ways in sort of the larger colonial context for us, even within our own communities. I think we still have a lot of healing that we need to continue undertaking as peoples together. Um, but I will say, in terms of changing this question to Indigenous education, which is my field, I can say I have seen changes. I first started teaching in our teacher education program when I was at the University of British Columbia, which is the neighboring university. I first started teaching a mandatory teacher education course on Indigenous education. And that came as a result. And so I started teaching that course prior to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada and its final report. And when I first started teaching that course, I recall there was a lot of resistance. And the questions from students at that time was, why do we have to learn about Indigenous education? Why are you forcing us? And then we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And then we began to see significant shifts in the policy context related to the teaching of Indigenous education, particularly here in the province of British Columbia. We had significant changes happen at the provincial level, which included an effort. It's not perfect, but an effort to begin indigenizing the curriculum, and also we began to see legislative changes in terms of teacher education with these mandatory courses, but also professional legal requirements as part of their practice. And so that's something that we could point towards. And so once the Truth and Reconciliation Commission happened and the report came out, about 2 years after that, I was teaching the course again. And suddenly questions from students were different, right? It wasn't like, why? It's like, how do we do this? And I think we're still there, right? But there, and not to say that there isn't resistance, there isn't racism, even for us that teach courses like this, there is. But I would say that the willingness is there now in terms of the recognition that if they want to have a career in education, that there is going to be a requirement to engage with indigeneity. Could be shallow, and in many cases it is, but at least in order to get through their professional training, they can't ask us why anymore.
No.
So that's one shift I've seen.
That is that is so exciting. That makes my heart very happy.
Yeah.
Says, yes. Uh, Carrying on with the question, we have Sham. He has a question. What does repatriation look like for those who have been taken away from their homelands centuries ago, especially when their country does not recognize or acknowledge their identity or history?
Wow. I don't know if I can answer that question. That's not my experience. Um, Yeah, I'd have to think about that. I wouldn't want to project myself into somebody else's reality. But I want to honor the disconnects that do happen and recognize that they are important. I don't, I don't see that as taking away from who we are, our spirit as Indigenous peoples, and the ongoing practices that we can do no matter where we are to support our indigeneity and who we are. But without knowing more about the context, I don't know if I can speak into that reality other than to maintain hope and to continue finding those sparks and ways of reconnecting. Um, yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. And we'll take the last question for the night. We have Varsha. She's asked the question, what advice would you give young Indigenous and tribal scholars trying to balance academic research with community responsibilities?
Keep on doing it. Keep on doing it. Um, Take breaks. I think it's wonderful that you have a forum like this developed and that you have the support network. And I think these networks are so important when we get tired and exhausted. The work that's required of us, often within academic institutions, requires sort of these fragmented forms of our identity. And when we want to bridge our hereditary and our community responsibilities, it means double the work. And I
Yes.
think being aware, if you're not already, I'm sure many of you already know this, but it is double the work. And documenting everything that you do within your community and trying to find ways to support that in terms of either your graduate research or if you're within the university system, I'm speaking more as a tenure track faculty, then you're really documenting the relationships that you're forming or that you're maintaining, I think is an important word. The efforts that you do to maintain relationships, the efforts that you take to learn your language, the efforts that you take to undertake your hereditary responsibilities, document all of that. And as much as possible, try to include that within your tenure and promotion system. I think internal advocacy with those of who are in the system that have more power is always really important, especially if we're kind of at a junior level. Definitely don't do the work alone but with this activism, but trying to create spaces where the institution isn't fragmenting us into these sort of binaries and enabling us to kind of do the work that's required of us within our communities, but that also can uplift our knowledge systems and our languages. So yeah, it's not always a balancing act. I often think it's a bit more of a juggle
Mm.
and prioritizing. But there's also a really great article. I'll have to look it up and send it to you. Written by Sarah Davidson, who is a Haida scholar. She's somebody I work with at Simon Fraser University. And her father is a very well-known carver, and she herself is now learning from him. But she wrote a piece about the masks. So um, some of the different masks that we can take on within our academic lives and how we have to sometimes put on different masks, which are sometimes they're outright resistance, sometimes they're conceding. But and there's many, but she talks about how at various times in her academic career, she's had to wear different masks, and some of them can be disempowering.
Mm.
But there are moments and spaces within the power structures that can allow for resistance or for the uplifting of who we really are.
Mm.
And so I think that would be a helpful article for people to read. And yeah, maybe encourage a discussion with that or even with Sarah Davidson herself. Um, but yeah, I think that's my answer. And this is
Yes.
carved by my brother, Kelvin McNeil. And this is in our language, the word for doctor doesn't translate in a Western way. And so the word is halite, and halite is actually a healer, right? And
Oh,
so our doctors are supposed to be healers. And so I have this mask, and I just love it. And I keep her, and this is a lady halite, so I keep her behind me in order to support good medicine and the work that we do. Yeah.
oh, that is so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. We do have one last question. Would it be possible for us to take it up, please?
Sure.
Okay. The question is, what ethical safeguards should global institutions follow to ensure Indigenous knowledge is not extracted or misused?
And when you say global institutions, are you talking about those that have been designed through colonialism, imperialism, other forms of dominance, or is this like indigenous global institutions?
Varsha, maybe you
Or
can.
all, or all, maybe it's all. I can just talk generally, and I think I
Yes.
would imagine that Dr. Mintz would have spent a significant time on this, but recognizing that we do have international standards through the CARE principles. We also have OCAP, ownership, control, and protection. And so recognizing some of these frameworks and how they can be applied to our work is really important,
Mm.
but also recognizing that yes, some of these institutions are global in scope, but where are they really located and where are the impacts, right? And if they're doing the work well, that's fine, but if they're not, then just recognizing the local context and either way, really, recognizing the local context of where we are and what are those protocols, right? And we as Indigenous peoples all have our own protocols on knowledge sharing, knowledge transmission, and so recognizing that some of these larger ethical frameworks can support our research, but it's also important for us to know the local protocols and indigenous peoples that we're working with and how are we going to be honoring them, not on paper, but also in practice, right? So I think it's kind of a and both, right? It's the local and sort of some of these international and in some cases national contexts if we have those frameworks set up. Yeah.
No, thank you for talking about a very important part, which is also like translating it into action. Because I feel like most of the time, we as academic people, we are excellent when it comes to paper. Our papers are beautiful, but when we go down and look at the reality, it is a very big question mark. We really need to like self-reflect also, even sometimes even as Indigenous researchers, we ourselves also, we really need to ask ourselves, what am I doing when I go back? How well have I translated and analyzed the works? What do the communities know about the analysis also? And I feel like these things, when it comes to translation and going back to the community, does play such a massive role in terms of ethical considerations. And thank you for reminding us about that once again.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Amy, for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your story. Uh, one of the slides had this particular title there, which said, "May our stories guide us into greater wholeness and unity." So today, and that really spoke to me because you shared your story, your lived experience, and I feel that has united us together in coming and helping us realize about the wholeness and totality of the shared experiences that we have. But even though we were living in like oceans apart, but knowing that mountains can be moved and oceans also, we can like actually cross oceans, I think really encourages us, especially when we are here in India, because for us, we live in such fragmented corners of the country where many a times we do not even know what another Indigenous brother and sister may look like, or what the language may sound like, or how far we've migrated off and how far we've left our land and our culture and identity. So sometimes it feels like our identity also has become like a legend and a myth that we so much talk about. And hearing this story that you told us about your lived experience of your totem coming back home, I'm sure has encouraged all of us. And all of us here are professionals with this zeal in our heart. Oh, I want to give back to my society, give back to my community. So you use this beautiful sentence, cultural responsibility intertwined with academic responsibilities. So I want to encourage everybody and leave everybody with this, that when we are thinking about giving back to the community, then it should be cultural responsibility intertwined with our dash responsibilities. So for me, it will be academic responsibility, and that dash could be a designer, could be an architect, could be anything, but along with that, so it goes on with that intertwined ways. And we are a part of a story, but I loved how you said that that we all, it's very important for us also to mold the next story we want to become. So I really hope that all of us here have learned much from you, and we will continue to be able to tell our narratives. So thank you so much for giving us a massive chunk of your morning. Um,
Thanks so
now
much. I look forward to staying in touch, and please visit my website. I think you may already have that, but amyparent.ca should be updated within the next week. So there'll be some new things on there for folks. And yeah, I look forward to staying connected with the Travel Design Forum, and I look forward to learning your stories. I will just say one thing. I was so impressed with just the amount of work that has been done to curate this month-long forum. And I'm not a person who has a lot of time to watch television. And in fact, I only have maybe once a month will I ever sit down and watch something. So seeing all these amazing videos, I'm like, I got my whole winter planned out of like everything I want to watch. So thank you. And I look forward to
Oh,
being inspired by your stories. So thank
oh,
you. Yeah.
thank you so much. We are really encouraged to hear these words from you as well.
Okay.
Now we have some announcements because, of course, even though Tribal Futures 2.0 closes today, but that does not mean that it is the end of our TDF activities. So I'll give this time to my co-worker Sweta, who's going to tell us about the exciting things that are upcoming. Swati, please take the time.
So now let's take a look at what TDF has in store for the rest of 2025. The fourth edition of the TDF photography contest is now open. Those interested can visit our website for more details. TDF, in partnership with the One EQ Foundation, announces the third year of its SSC scholarships for scheduled tribe candidates preparing for SSC exams. As part of this program, thousands of scholarships will be offered, providing digital learning access to the scholars. Applications are open from the evening of September 1st on our website. Please check it out. And from the 7th of September, a week residential course on intellectual property and geographical indications will begin at the Adivasi Academy at Pejgarh. Moving forward, between the 9th and 14th of September, Travel Design Forum is delighted to partner with the Ethnokino Film Festival in Switzerland at Bern and Meiringen. So TDF will proudly present the films of two tribal filmmakers from India. One is Ade, directed by Teja Rio, and another is Abua Paika Kabu Bagaya, directed by Sneha Mundari. And one film from Nepal, which is called Ningwasum by Subhash Thebe. From the 4th and the 7th of October, from the 4th to the 2nd, 7th of October, TDF will hold its third annual boot camp in Wayanad, Kerala. The boot camp will include 2 days of workshop, followed by 2 days of experiential learning and interaction with the tribal communities of Wayanad. Registrations are open on our website. And finally, a reminder, membership for Tribal Design Forum is open to all. Those who are interested can visit the website at www.tribaldesignforum.com. Thank you, and over to Anupra.
Thank you so much for that, Swati. I hope everybody is excited. I particularly am very excited about the boot camp because that is that one event where all of us can meet together in person and share our stories and most of all share our food. I love it. I love it when we all come with our food from a different region and our own clothes, and it is one of the most fun experiences that you can have. And sorry. So today is the last and the final day of our Tribal Futures 2.0. This is our second edition, and this event would not have been possible without many people. Like I said, it was a dream seen by few, but executed and brought to life by many. So we are indebted to our friends in India and overseas who have joined in at various times and at various capacities to make Tribal Futures 2.0 a great learning experience. We're grateful to the Indigenous elders, brothers, and sisters from overseas. We had Dr. Amy Parent of the Ningxia Nation, Canada, Desna Wangas Kolam from the Maori community. We had Frida Larios from El Salvador. We had Jero Gonzalez from Peru, as well as Uriel Montufar from Peru, and we had Glenda Yanez from Bolivia. We are equally grateful to our tribal elders, brothers, and sisters in India from the Oran, Munda, Santhal, Karya, Rabha, Khasi, Jaintia, Garo, Lepcha, Tripuri, Chakasang, Gond, Mahadev, Koli, Warli, Pardi, Ratwa, Bhilal, Meena, Bodh, and Van Gujral tribal communities. Namely, in order of appearances, we've had Dr. Sonajiri Mins, Professor Virginius Khaka, Preeti Bora and Lemp Boham, Dr. Madan Meena, Sengai G. Momin, Jacinta Kerketa, Mahigane, Daisy Momin, Mokokoza, Karamat Ali and Tofik, Rida Hongla Gapto, Vivek Singh and Rekha Wasil, Labding Siam, Gunjal Ikar Munda, Naran Bhai Ratwa and Vikesh Bhai Ratwa, Vandana Tete, Deepa Khaka, Prakash Bhoer, Anil Tudu, Krishadhar Maji and Amar Jamunda, Shire Murmu, Ramesh Kumar Dhruve and Umar Pardi, Tom Murmu, Dr. Anugrah Pandey, Padma Angmo, Dheeraj Rabha, Dr. Bipin Jojo, Koloma Band, Ganesh Tilgam and Priyanshu Raj, Rigzeng Wongmo, Tumlesh Niti and Navi Goyal, Vasanta Bhai Ratwa, Dr. Esther Saim, Harish Bhai Ratwa, Dr. Harshit Sosan Lakra, Tenzongmit Lepcha, Kushal Kurushma, Uma Waladi, and Nilima Shori, Tanisha Panbu, Ritika Dewar, and Saptal Singh. Along with this, we cannot go without thanking our team members. Tribal Futures 2.0 could not have been successful without the help of its wonderful young team from various tribes of India and proud members of the Tribal Design Forum I will call out their names in alphabetical order. If you are here, and I'm sure you're here, it would be really lovely if you could also show us your face and just do a wave, okay? So we have Akum Tong. We have Anamika Maria. We have Anupam Purti, Dilit Dhan, Malati Mahaji, Ripandi Lepcha, Shalini Kullu, Shweta Guria, Shyam Murmu, Swati Lakra, Varsha Kachap, Vipul Barla, and a special thanks to Sakshi for hosting sessions in Spanish. We are also very grateful for the support of Bhasha Research and Publications Center, Baroda, the Adivasi Academy, which is India's only tribal-led, tribal-run institution, and Greener Films and its fellows. Along with this, we cannot go without thanking all of you who've joined in every single day, who's contributed to the forum, who's contributed to the discourse with all your questions, your participation, your involvement, even your words of encouragement, and all of these things. This curation and this Tribal Futures 2.0 has been successful because of your presence. So we are grateful to each and every one of you as well. And you can always reach out to us at tribaldesignforum.com or follow us on social media on our Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or any other medium, and we go by our handle at Tribal Design Forum. And before I leave, I'd like to leave you with a short word. We've been caterpillars, wondering who we'd be. But now we are evolving into vivid butterflies. So take those dreams and fly. Now you can't stay, you got to fly. Take your stories and soar. pollinate the world, the universe you hold. My name is Anukra, and I thank you so much for being here today. And on behalf of Tribal Design Forum, we are very grateful to announce that Tribal Futures 2.0 comes to an end today very successfully because of the collaborative effort of you and me. So thank you so much once again. Mm, thank you. Okay.